Hey, welcome back. This is week 3 now, lesson 1, lecture 1. This is called Initial Requirements and Use Cases. This will be just a standard slide lecture, not so much interactive like the Access ones, but we'll be getting into more of those later within this week. So just let's get through this one first, and let's pop over to the slide deck. All right, we're still going into the development phase, and that's what a lot of this whole course is on: design and development. So we got to start looking at things like initial use case requirements. And what we're going to do is we need to get from a real world problem to a real world solution. Uh, Jumping directly, trying to just hop right into it straight from it's never works easy because really the requirements gathering, all these different things you need to understand about the problem. There's a lot of understanding that needs to go in order to develop a solution. So again, down here we need to understand the task and identify the task data needed to support the tasks. All right, so let's go ahead and look at that. Now, keep in mind, understanding the problem involves looking at both inputs and output tasks. What's going on? How is this going to work in the real world? It's the real world does very rarely works in an Excel book. So the model goes hand in hand with the use cases. And you need to reevaluate whether the model can actually handle all the use cases properly. If not, you need to reevaluate your model. Most of the time, the users are not going to have the information you need readily available. It's going to happen iteratively through discussions, and you'll come back and say, "Hey, I found this weird problem. Is this going to work?" It's a very iterative process. Users can be very narrowly focused, and it's your job as a designer to not kind of fall into that trap, to kind of look at the bigger picture, the broader picture, because you don't want to build something that can only be used for one. It was a one-trick pony. You want something that can do a lot of different things. So let's go with an example here. We have meal deliveries. Visitors to the city staying at a local hotel are offered a service that will deliver them a variety of takeout meals. A visitor calls the company, places an order for the meals. The receptionist, the driver is selected and dispatched to pick up the meals in the restaurant, deliver them. This looks like an example of Grubhub or whatever they call it. They bring the food to you. Uber Eats. So we need, in order to build a database that'll function, that we need to figure out who are the users, what tasks do they do, and what data is needed. So let's look at some of the tasks involved. The visitor calls the company. The receptionist takes the order. Receptionist selects, assigns a driver. Receptionist gives the order to the driver. Driver picks up the meals. Driver delivers the meals. Visitor pays the driver. Driver informs the company. Receptionist records the completed order. Driver maintains a timesheet. So if we decide what systems will be involved with, well, the visitor calling the company is probably not going to be anything to do with our system. Paying the driver, no, probably be cash or credit, whatever it is, at the driver. And the driver informs the company, maybe, and I'd say more probably than not. And actually, I'd say all of these are more probable than not in today's world of the cell phone. And I don't know if this idea or this project was hatched prior to the smartphone. But yeah, this actually would all be done. You wouldn't even probably call a company. You just put it in your app. But let's pretend that's back in the old days and you actually calling somebody up. So yeah. Now, orders that would definitely be involved, receptionist putting the order in, selecting the driver, all this stuff would definitely be part of the tasks. I'm going to argue that these would all probably be part of the task now because we have smartphones and, but hey, sometimes schools are a bit behind the time. So let's go ahead forward. So let's try to build out, again, we're going to, instead of just a boring slide deck, let's build out some pictures so it kind of looks here. And then we can say the receptionist, what kind of things, and we got to break it down different users. What are the users? And in the earlier case, we removed the actual person that's ordering the food as a user, even though I'm going to argue that they could be a user, especially with, technology. And so let's just consider we have the receptionist and the driver. The receptionist is going to maintain the order information, view drivers' availability, and assign drivers. The driver is going to view order details, maintain order status details, and maintain a timesheet. And what data is needed for each task? Well, you're going to need the order data, driver data, order data, and timesheet data. Which, so that's what, this is kind of, we're trying to think here. We're going from the person. Sorry, lost my train of thought again. Let's just start again. So you really want to kind of break this, requirements into users, and here we've broken it to two users, receptionists, the tasks, and then make sure you understand the data behind the task, because you can't, if you don't have this data, like let's say for some reason we don't have a timesheet, we can't put that as a task. So you have to make sure the data is available for that. Okay. So this is that's where we're moving into the modeling world here. And we can start by creating shells of each of the tables for the classes we're going to have. And as we went back here, remember we had the three classes. We had order data, driver data, and timesheet data, which I promise you in the real world is going to evolve into much more than three tables, but just from this thought experiment, we'll stay with three tables. Okay, so we create the shells. Let's not worry about attributes at this point. Again, attributes, fields, columns, all the same thing. I don't know why people, especially in computers, love to name things 50 times over. And think about the different classes the data might relate to each other. How does the order data relate to driver? Well, an order gets assigned to a driver for delivery. How does a driver relate to timesheet? Well, it's filled out by the driver. And how does an order relate to a timesheet? It doesn't, so order and timesheet are not related. Although there's really not a timesheet plugin without an order, so it is tertiary relation, but we'll say not related just for this exercise. All right. So setting this up, we have the timesheets going to the driver, and the driver and the order are connected. So that's what we're doing here. We've got, remember, our relationships we've got here. Now let's go down here. Let's put in, just some attributes for fun. Timesheet, we'd have the date, driver ID, hours worked, and driver, driver ID. There can only be one driver. Can only have one ID, so one of one. You can't have, if you're a driver, that you're not going to be in the database twice. And you could have 0 to many across the timesheet because you don't work. Maybe you're a driver and you never worked a day. You just got hired. So, or every day you work, you're going to have a timesheet plug-in. And the same thing here. You're a driver, and if you got hired, you never had an order, but you can have many orders. So, and just, these are just some standard ideas. Driver name, last name, first name, phone status, order ID, menu, amount, status, pickup. And of course, as we kind of discussed earlier, you're going to have to make this work. In reality, so you've got driver ID there. You're going to want a driver ID here. Well, I guess they have it as assigned driver. See, I wouldn't do that. I would make sure it's driver ID. Just trust me for later design. You can always alias this stuff later in your code so that that's what the user sees. But inside the database, you're so much better just having it, designed in a way. Now, does this initial model satisfy our use cases? Let's take a look. Your problem's best expressed, does it? I mean, so I think so. It's a baseline model that will meet most of our use cases. It's a very simplified model, but that's what we're going for, simple. Now remember, your problem is best expressed by the users. Your model's driven by the nature and details of the problem. If you don't understand the problem, your model's not going to work. And you're going to revisit the problem in the model as many times as necessary, because this model works for what they just told us. But now let's imagine, because right now people are calling in, but what happens if we give the customer, if somebody in the company wakes up and realizes it's 2022 and people have smartphones and we just put an app on there, we're going to have to add a user table on here because they're going to input stuff. So this model will change. And that's always, keep in mind, that's always the flexibility you're going to need, is to be able to add changes. You got to keep that in mind. What will happen if I have to add an end user table? Will it break what I've got? And it won't. You'll be able to function around that. So now these are just some sample of the steps to work through when going through the analysis phase. Say, what does the user do? What data is involved in the user's jobs? What's the main objectives of the system? What data is needed to satisfy the main objective? What are the input use cases? What is the data model? Can it handle everything so far? And what are the output use cases? And can the data model provide everything so far? Okay, so that's kind of the walkthrough. I'm going to challenge you guys to, we talked about how, this model is definitely acknowledging the real world out there with smartphones. So why don't, as a challenge, if you're interested, why don't you try to build out that model again we had, let's go back and show that screen one more time. Let's go back and look at that model and try to build that model out, but add a user. Add what happens if I have an app and I can just go on my phone. I don't have to call somebody and I can automatically. And in that case, even things like payment from the driver would be handled with the app. So that's, think about the things you'd add to that. And that's kind of as learning how to evolve. And thanks a lot. Look forward to seeing you again soon, and have a good time.